Okay, welcome to the podcast Mystical Connections, Let Your Life Speak. My name is Tom Wolfe. I'm a Quaker Christian minister. What we'll be doing is using the method that William Penn perfected in the 17th century of taking a Christian principle and going through other scripture to find out where they agreed with Jesus. And we'll be doing 33 principles that come from an Eastern mystic named Meher Baba. Today, our guest is a Christian pastor, Joel. He's joining us today to discuss the way that 12 of these principles relate to the Christian scripture and to his life experience. Is there anything you'd like to say about yourself, Joel?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in the Christian faith most of my life and various different denominations, and became a pastor and have been doing that for a bunch of years now. And I love doing work of helping people discover who they are and be their best self. And then I am also an Enneagram coach, so I do that quite a bit. I think the more the better for me. So I like to have a full week, and so that's been keeping me super busy meeting with people. So that's kind of what I do these days. I'm married and I have an 8-year-old, and he is a fantastic little guy, and we have a whole lot of fun together. So,
And maybe for the people listening, what is an Enneagram? If you're an Enneagram coach?
Yeah, so the Enneagram is a personality system whose wisdom tradition dates back to, no one knows for sure, but some estimates are about 2,000 to 3,000 years old. And it comes from the different mystic traditions of the major religions. And it was passed on orally for many, many years. And right around 1970 was when it finally got written down. And it's a system of 9 different types that really addresses the core motivations that drive our behavior and then shows us a path to transformation. So,
cool.
Yeah.
All right, Pastor Joel, are you ready to jump into finding where the principles of the world religions agree? And
we'll find out.
Yeah, and see where our, as 2 Christian ministers, I also have a quote from the Gospels for each principle that we'll read after the principle, and we'll just see where we go.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, and then we'll try and, if you don't mind, we'll try and focus on our own experience of whether it really speaks to us personally and whether we can use it in our lives.
Sure.
All right, we'll jump right in. Okay, the first principle is longing. If you experience that same longing and thirst for union with God as one who has been lying for days in the hot sun of the Sahara experiences the longing for water, then you will find and realize God. And the quote from the Gospels is the first and great commandment. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. That is the first commandment. That's Mark 12:30.
Yeah.
So
thoughts around that, huh?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I think for me, the most frustrating thing is in my interactions as a pastor, is if I find that the person that I'm dealing with has no longing to change in any respect. They're just, marriage is falling apart, but they have zero desire to do anything to make any changes. Or it appears that way anyways. So I'm trying to find where the longing is, where's the desire. And oftentimes it's more of a superficial desire that I think that people initially relate to. Like, I don't want my marriage to fall apart, or I don't want to, I don't want my business to fall apart. Whatever it is, it's very superficial as a need. If we press in a little bit more deeply, it's often tied to something much more core to the human experience, the need to feel like you have some significance in life. And for me, that's all spiritual. Once you get there, you're getting into spirituality. Mm-hmm. And so it's there that I find longing, oftentimes. Even if they've fallen asleep to that, it's there. And when that wakes up in somebody and they begin to pay attention to that longing, stuff starts happening. And it's really more of like, instead of trying to, it's the analogy I think of is, instead of trying to push water, it's more of creating a channel. And then the water starts to flow. But most of the time there's a little gunk built up there, and you kind of have to clear it out.
Sure. What this brought up for me was a story in the interfaith movement. I was sitting next to the David King. Y'all aren't from the Washington area, but there's this huge Mormon temple right on the Washington Beltway that everybody calls Ahas, except for the Mormons. And he was 6 years a senator from Utah, a Mormon guy. And we were sitting around the board at the interfaith conference, and he just, in the middle of the board meeting, goes, "Can't you feel that everybody in this room is longing for God? The Sikhs, the Muslims, everybody's on the same team." And he goes, "But I can't go back to the Mormon church and say that." And it was just this moment that we had a group of people who really are longing for God of all 11 different faiths.
Yeah.
And he was acknowledging that. And it was really beautiful and also really poignant, because he said, "I can't go back to the Mormon church and say we're all on the same team." Yeah.
I mean, that's what I run into oftentimes. And, it's the tribalistic sort of thinking that, we all run into. And there's a need to protect the tribe. I think those are conflicting oftentimes. Maybe not conflicting. They actually pair up pretty well sometimes for folks, where there's the tribalistic thing, but then there's also this spiritual experience that they've either had or they're longing for. And I think when we get past that tribalistic component, then it starts being you have that same desire as well. And so when we talk about those things, for me, that's where it breaks, where the practicality is really the unifying factor there. As long as it stays in the sort of concepts and, dogma and that space, we really can't bridge that. But when it gets into like you're talking about longing there, I think that's really where people start to find commonality.
Well, I can't say anything to improve on that, so I think we should move on to the next one. Okay, the second one is peace of mind. That was really beautiful, by the way, Pastor.
Thank you.
Yeah. Peace of mind. If you have the peace of a frozen lake, then too you will realize God. And the quote from the Gospels for peace is Christ speaking, John 14:27. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you, not as the world gives. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Yeah. And I always think possibly my favorite thing that Christ ever said was the peace that passes understanding. Rather than, as you were saying earlier before we started to record, rather than it being in your head, there's a peace that comes from our heart that unites us, and it passes beyond understanding.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe say more about that, because I think of peace in all various ways, like the personal peace that you have. That's not really necessarily connected to other people. It's that some people describe like internally I feel good, which then I would assume produces a more peaceful existence and creates peace around you. So to your mind, are you thinking about peace in that personal, private sense, or in the sense of relational peace?
When I turn to God in my own life, in my prayer life, and I find there's a peace there that in my own life, I can usually figure out why I feel peaceful. Sales are up, expenses are down. It's good with the wife. It's good with the kids. I have 4 granddaughters. It's good with the granddaughters. But when I turn to God, there's this peace that I don't understand. It comes from being involved with I am that I am. And it's beyond my understanding, but I know in my heart over and over, when I turn in prayer to God, there's a peace that's beyond what my mind is doing in my personal peace, evaluating this or that. And the reason I say it's a both and is because when I tap into God's peace that is beyond mind, then everything improves in my personal life. When I come back out of that prayer session, then everything in my life is more peaceful. And again, I can't explain it. It's just I'm carrying this sense of well-being and peace that affects so it's both and. It's both the peace of God, but then in my life, the and it affects everything that I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine for some people it'd probably be. I think of people in my network who, for them, it's more it starts external as opposed to internal. So there's I want to make sure that everybody around me is good. If everybody around me is good, then I'm good. And then I can go and work on me a little bit. But that's the kind of outward focus. And then other people, it's super inward focus, and they just sort of retreat and spend a lot of time in that place of peace. But it is something that comes up a lot for folks, is the need for peace, internal peace, but also communal, relational peace, and
And then if you have the peace of a frozen lake, I think is an interesting analogy.
Say more about that.
The Quakers have, if nothing else, focused on the stillness
Yeah.
as the way to God, the be still and know that I am God.
Mm.
And again, my own experience is that probably the best analogy would be a frozen lake. The Quakers really seek stillness complete is the goal of Quaker worship, that the Spirit can be heard.
The whole thing of, it's interesting, longing and peace. And how they could coexist, because to some degree, longing is a need-driven, something that is pulling you, that creates a measure of discomfort, and at the same time, peace.
That's a both and.
It's a both and, isn't it?
Sure it is.
And both can happen at the same time, which is such a paradox. But I think there's that longing that drives you, or that pulls you towards spirituality, and and yet in those places that you're describing of complete peace, the times that I've had that has been without. There's no desire. There's no compulsion. There's no ambition. There's just a deep okayness.
I am.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And it brings to mind one of the things I've always liked about the poet we call Rumi. All Rumi means is he's from Rome. What they call him in the East is Jalaluddin. But anyway, he has this saying, Rumi, that always remember the water also seeks the thirsty. Yeah. So that's seeming paradox about
awesome,
longing and peace is what we're longing for is so much bigger than we are, that I think that can be both and. It is both and, but it seems paradoxical that you would be, have this desire for God and this longing for the beloved and still have peace, but it's not, they happen at the same time. And my experience is the more I long for the beloved God, the more peace I have. But it seems contradictory, longing and peace. But it's really a spiral, and that it is dynamic, and it's constantly the interplay between longing and peace, and then longing more, and then finding more peace. And it seems to me that an analogy would be that religion is sort of what says it's a straight line and it's not dynamic, and that it posts guards on either side saying it's not both and. It's either this or you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in a straight line, but I feel like I'm hearing you say that, and I totally agree, that it's a spiral, and you're dynamic toward that which we can't really understand. We can only surrender to and love. God is not a straight linear process. It's not something we think our way to. It's a dynamic that involves our heart, and it goes in a spiral.
Yeah. That's really well said. Yeah, because that is without being hard on religion, but religion does tend towards a collective mentality, a group mentality, and so people want to know where are the guardrails, and so there's this weird dynamic, using that word, between the leadership and the people who are asking. People are asking for what are the guardrails, and then the leadership feels like, yes, I have to give them and so, or the leadership already leans that way and gives that the guardrails, and the people who come there feel that sense of safety. I know what they are. But this longing, if you pay attention to it and you follow it, will inevitably lead you beyond the confines of a particular belief system. Because curiosity and the allowance of that to just emerge, that I have this desire, I have this curiosity, I have this internal compulsion, I have to pursue this, I have to find that. If it's outside of that path with the guardrails on either side, what do you do then, right? So, so when I'm in conversation with people, when we lean into that space, there's all kinds of freedom and there's this dynamic and this energy and this flow. But then, when it comes back to, but what are the rules and then it becomes it feels very restrictive and narrowing. And so that dynamic between longing and peace, I don't think works really well in those spaces. You got to give the freedom. People have to be able to experience that.
We're good to move on to the next
Sure.
one. All right. Number 3, humility. If you have the humility of the earth, which can be molded into any shape, then you will know God. And then here's another one. This is from the Gospels. Again, the first letter of Peter. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he loves you.
Yeah. There is, I have to say, though, there is such a misunderstanding of humility, I think, in many of the circles that I'm in. Because there's this perception that humility means self-deprecation. It means self-forgetting. Mm-hmm. It means serving someone else, losing yourself and serving someone else. Mm-hmm. And those sound like good values, but it depends upon what's driving that whole thing. And I think that, and then in other times, people that are confident get seen as arrogant as well. So for me, in my journey, it has been, because I was raised in that environment where it was, humility was always preached at us, and it had those meanings to it, like, don't ever say that you did something really well. Just if anybody says anything to you, there's this cliche statement you respond with, which is, all glory to God. And that was a dismissive way of not allowing that to come in, because it might make you arrogant. And so it's brought in, and I don't want to go down this path because it would take the whole hour here or more. But it produced so much bad fruit in the lives of so many people, including mine. And it took years for me to be able to finally say, there are some things that I'm really good at.
Yeah, sure.
And not feel like I'm leaning into arrogance. And at first, you're like a kid because you were not exposed or trained to actually know how to handle affirmation and how to handle a good self-esteem. So it was a lot of practice, but eventually it got to where I could say, I'm really good at this. But incidentally, what is interesting is that did not at all, it wasn't like, because I'm good at this, I've lost humility. Actually, it helped me to lean more into humility. Because by being able to say, this is what I'm really good at, I'm also able to say, here's some things I'm not very good at. And then, to be able to receive. And for some of us, it's extraordinarily difficult to be on the receiving end of things. And that, to me, is where, humility comes in. And it looks so different. For some people, they can't seem to receive anything from anybody else. They're the ones who have to be doing. And so for them to be able to actually say thank you and to be in that receptive role is humility.
All right. Can't improve on that, so we'll move on to the next one. The next one is the fourth one in 12 Ways of Realizing God is desperation. So if longing is not comfortable, I think we just moved into one that's, all right, desperation. If you experience the desperation that causes a man to commit suicide, and you feel that you cannot live without seeing God, then you will see him. And let's see what the Gospels say about that. Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Because hunger and thirst can be desperate.
How would you nuance that from longing?
Well, kind of the way I don't know if it's nuanced, but what it brings up for me is pretty direct. It's kind of the opposite of nuance, is that the times in my life when I've been faced with situations that are desperate, when there was no worldly answer left and I had to turn to God, is when I grew the most spiritually.
And you wouldn't describe that as longing. You would describe that as desperation. Yeah.
But again, the desperation as the peace led to the longing because there was no other choice. So I longed, if you will, Pastor, for God to help me out because I was stuck. I had no resource left except God.
Yeah.
But it was a God to whom I turned in surrender. It wasn't a God I said, I want this and this and this. It's like, I don't know what I want. I don't know. I'm desperate. I don't have an answer. Can I be helped?
Yeah.
But those are the times, because I learned to rely on God, that I developed a new facet of my personality, or whatever the answer was in the hour of desperation and need, really precipitated growth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a friend who said something about the sort of like, when we're not able to, through our resources, through our capacities, solve a particular problem that's in front of us, that then for many Christians, it's going to that language of, I just give up, I surrender to God, and then there's a sense of peace that comes in. But it's this, and for this individual, it was actually not a good thing. It was a negative thing. Like, that's what we do, or not necessarily negative, but more of a psychological thing. Like, that's what we do to create a sense of okayness within ourselves, is that there's this, celestial parent who's going to come in and take care of us when we can't take care of the problem ourselves, right? And I thought about that, and I could see some places where that's been true. But I've also had those experiences like you described, except I grew up in the church, so I didn't have a moment of like, without God, and then, life's not working, and then I convert to God, So growing up in the church, I had those experiences at times in my own life where I can't figure this out. I've pushed as hard as I can, and I cannot get past this point, right? And in the past, it was sort of this like pulling back and just, well, okay, I yield, I give up. And I did have some pretty amazing spiritual experiences. But inevitably what I find is that once that has passed, that it's not so much God on the outside who's coming in to rescue, but it's much more of an incarnational, to use that theological term, of an incarnational work. Like, I'm calling you back into this. So it's like, you're gonna do this, and so that desperation has so many profound effects, insights. It produces so much because it shows me where I'm working out of perhaps a lower part of my being as opposed to the higher part. So meaning like I'm working from a need to feel like I have significance, but at it from a place of where I would say that was more of the ego trying to survive, and trying to make a name for itself, and then realizing that's what's going on, is that I can't do this by the ways I've been doing it, and then that leads me to these newer windows and vistas. I can see now, oh, that's what I've been trying to do. And, anyways, there's so much more that could be said about that, but that's what desperation, that's how I see desperation in the spiritual world.
Can't improve on that. So we'll move on to the next one. That's just beautiful.
Thank you.
Faith. That's number 5. And this is, as pastors, we can read this and use we have a master, Jesus, the Christ, the God-man. So, but this one refers to the master. So some people might not be able to use this principle. But anyway, faith. If you have the complete faith in your spiritual master, to the degree that believing it was night, even though it was day, because your master said so, then you will know God. There's one, huh?
Yeah. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but I would push back on that.
Well, again, in those moments of desperation, and it wasn't so much not believing in God, just you had referenced that. It's more like a worldly situation that was just like not working, just to be clear. But my experience was that I had to have faith, though I had no idea what the answer was going to be, that my spiritual master had it. But over and over, that's been true. Even though with my limited mind and limited resources, I had gotten to a place that wasn't working, I did not know what the next step was. I knew that the Christ within me, the spiritual master within me, could handle it all, and it's always worked out. It doesn't mean it's comfortable. It doesn't mean that it's fun. But it's always worked out. But it always did involve, as you said, Pastor, that I had to, maybe lose a little selfishness or change my way of looking at things or certainly learn something else. It wasn't like you just get handed a gift. A lot of times it was, a work that took years to let go of, being angry with people or judgmental of people, for instance.
I just because I think, again, a lot of it is contextualized. So when you give that your context to it, maybe a story with it, that I can, I've had those experiences, right? But that the way that's stated to me would come across as blind faith, right? And this is part of, so, I'm not saying I'm right at all. I'm just saying, my own process has been at times wanting to see more than I can see and should see, right? So I acknowledge that. Like I need to see and I need to know before I can feel like, okay, we got this. So now the inner peace returns. And when people would say to me, just trust God, it would just make me so frustrated with that because my question was, what the heck does that mean? Just trust God. What does that look like to you? If it means abdicating, I can't because I'm responsible for the outcome of this particular project. So I'm not entirely sure what you mean by just trust God, because the circumstances are saying this is going in this direction. So, to say, so that blind faith kind of thing, or people saying, and people have said that. I've got friends who are atheists who have told me, if you Christians, it's like it's blind faith. You just like you don't see God, but you say that there is a God. So, but I think for me, I would say it would trouble me that the way it's stated would trouble me is because I do think that to some degree, what our seeing does need to change sometimes. So if the master says it's nighttime and I'm saying, no, it's daytime, it's not an issue of a contrary realities, but more so an issue of my seeing oftentimes. And so when I go through the process of having that transformation take place, I do see differently. Anyway, so this is like the existential. This is like an issue that I've had for a while. But
sure, we all have,
yeah, there is an illustration that I think of that does work really well, and that is to some degree it works well. Okay, so here's is God as parent. Let's take that analogy. So I'm a parent. I've got an 8-year-old. When he's arguing with me about something that I know because I've lived longer than he has, and he's arguing with me, I eventually just have to tell him, particularly when they are more abstract concepts that he can't grab onto. You just have to trust me. I got this. I'm responsible to take care of you, and I've got this. But none of us lives with a God that's like a parent in that strictest sense, where we see and we hear, and that divine being is present and visible and guiding us step by step. It doesn't quite work that way in real life. And so when people say trust God, it's like, oh, sure, I'll just go home. I'll talk to God who lives at my house, and and he'll tell me what to do, kind of thing. So I think that's the part that I react against but that's not my reality. My reality is oftentimes the process looks different than what one might expect from reading something like that. That it feels much more like this wrestling match between myself and the divine, even though it's not this parent-child relationship like. And then there'll be this moment where my seeing will change, and then I'll see, oh, that's what you were saying. Oh, it is nighttime. Yeah.
Okay, number 6, fidelity. If you have the fidelity that your breath has in giving you company, even without you constantly feeling it until the end of your life, then both in happiness and in suffering gives you company and never turns against you, then you will know God. And the quote is direct from Christ. Do you know the red letter tradition? Yeah, I come from the red letter tradition. And for those listening, that means that everything that Jesus said is in red letters. And there were preachers when I was growing up who said, all you got to do is read the red letters. You don't need to read any commentary. So anyway, this is Jesus speaking, Matthew 5:18. For truly I say unto you that until heaven and earth pass away, not one jot or a tittle shall pass away from the law until all is fulfilled. So I think the reason that's fidelity is he's just saying that it's all been said and nothing needs to be changed. Even if heaven and earth pass away, there's a clear guideline here that we need to be in fidelity to.
What would that be, or what does that look like to you?
Well, all I can say about it is when I look back on a period, and if I haven't involved God in it, and haven't been in fidelity and asking what fidelity might be, that those are generally the most painful aspects of my life. If I start to try and do it by myself without fidelity, without saying, okay, God, I know you're in control of my life, and I want to be in accordance with your plan, that's when things don't go well for me. So, but when it goes well for me is when I have the fidelity. There's a saying in the Quran, one of the Muslim sayings I really like, is that God is closer than your jugular vein. That's pretty close. And when I stay in fidelity to that spirit and keep fidelity with that, it's like my breath, like this analogy, it's like your breath. Your breath is there. You don't think about your breath being there, but you use it and acknowledge it when you have to. And
so you're talking about more like a tuning in, tuning into that there's something that
Yes,
and you're at times you're very tuned into, and other times you feel like you're tuning out.
Yeah, exactly. But it's within your heart. It's so close that it is your core being. It's not external, a gray bearded man in the heavens. It's your own soul, your own heart. But I love the analogy of the breath. There's almost nothing closer to you than your breath. But you wouldn't turn against your breath.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, Pastor, but in my life, sometimes I've gone down some paths that, looking back on it, I wish I had not. And so I think, to keep fidelity to that's closer than your breath. It's so close to myself. and that spirit of love that's way in there. I think the analogy of staying is you don't think about your breath, but it's always there. But if you take it for granted and don't, and I always like that inspiration means both breath and inspiration. I've always loved that. We had a professional herb class where we had 5 different languages represented: Chinese, Hebrew, Persian, Greek, and English. And we asked if in the languages, if inspiration meant both inspiration, breathing, and inspiration, being in the spirit. And all of those 5 languages, the word breath also meant spirit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, let me think about the my life and growing up and having thought about tuning in and at times being aware of the divine with me. But most of the time, it was God is on the outside, and how am I doing to keep that God happy, to keep that God okay with me? And if I haven't paid attention enough to this God, then I need to. And you think it now. The way I say it now, it makes it sound really silly, but that was not at the conscious level; it was at the subconscious level. So I'm going about my life acting as if this is a very insecure God, that if I don't give a whole lot of attention to, something bad is going to happen, right? And so I had to do my time with God, and so say some prayers, read my Bible, that sort of thing, and over time, I really got sick of that. Like that
Sure.
really bothered me a whole lot.
Externalized,
And the voices of my atheist friends growing up who would say, "What kind of insecure megalomaniac are you serving?" And
Yeah,
it
sure.
really bothered me because at the core, that's what I was feeling, but I was rejecting it because my religion, that I was devoted to, had me thinking this way. So that shift of going from God purely on the outside to tuning more internal, the scary part was to believe that my desires, the deeper ones, not the superficial ones, but the deeper desires, the deeper longings, the deeper loves, those things were actually perhaps God. And that was scary because that was not this external thing.
Right.
And so for me, tuning in and that fidelity to the divine, to God, is tuning in and paying attention to those deeper longings, those deeper desires, and the unity and the oneness with this divine being that is beyond all things. And however people want to language it, that's been where I'm at now. I don't know where I'm going to be in 5 years, but that's where I'm at this point.
Amen and hallelujah. Excellent. So that brings us to the end of the 5th podcast, and thank you so much, Pastor. And Pastor Joel will be joining us again for the 6th podcast. And really, thank you so much. I've been really honored that you shared your spiritual journey.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to give you a way to follow up, which is our website, befriendlyministries.org, and to give you the titles that are available to you if you choose to help us in this work. The first book available is Where Other Faiths Agree with Jesus. The second one is the actual compilation itself, the 33 Habits of Highly Effective Prophets. Then we have one about William Penn called Architect of Unity Between Christianity and Islam. That's what William Penn did. We have another book called Where Other Faiths Agree with Mayor Baba. There's another book, Where Other Faiths Agree with Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the Quakers. Then there's a workbook for your church or school to help you teach the 33 habits, which is called the Workbook of the 33 Habits of Highly Effective Prophets. And finally, we have a workbook and book that shows where all the 11 religions teach forgiveness, and quotes from 11 different faiths on forgiveness. So again, that's befriendlyministries.org, and thank you so much for joining us.